But this is general. So on the one hand, you have the nature of the innovation, which is important, and I'll show you the differences with these other patterns, but also the nature and extent of institutionalization. If there is little institutionalization, there will be no recurrent pattern, obviously. But it's worthwhile to emphasize that, because that will come back at the end when I'll ask whether there is something like a pattern, a fifth pattern of innovation journeys. So the two, and particularly the second, is the basis for identification as a pattern. So innovation in agriculture was there before industrial innovation emerged, but it's becoming more explicit since the 19th century, partly because agricultural reform, which also starts in the late 18th, early 19th century. And it's not just agriculture, it's also nature development, some environmental stuff, rural development. And the key thing in terms of the nature of these innovation is that the performance, eventual performance that you want to achieve depends on growth and behavior of living entities. And so you can't sort of specify everything yourself, as you can do much more easily with mechanical engineering. So there's much more variability, contingency. Say the weather, farmers always complain about the weather, even if it helps them sometimes to be productive. And mechanical, chemical, electrical engineering are not the main input. It's something which I tend to call natural history, which is an old term, because I don't want to sort of say life sciences or something, because say farmers who don't know anything about formal biology might still have very good knowledge of what's happening on their land. And so there's lots of innovation on location. It's still a bit of a division of labor, but it's a very different division of labor. It's based on farm practices. And we actually have been doing a big study or set of studies the last 5-6 years on these local innovations, which are not necessarily linked to the typical research, expert-driven regimes of agricultural innovation. And this draws on, this combines a number of things where farmers actually developed the notion, this is the sort of cycle in which they work with, in this case it's a dairy farm. They developed the notion of good manure. And good manure was a manure which actually would not only be good here for the soil, but also would be related to the feeding regime of the cow. And the cow would be healthy because of the way that this whole cycle was organized. And that then organized the work of the farmers to do better in this respect, made it somewhat transferable, so others would take it up. And it linked also, was linked with a sort of overall landscape stuff of concerns about agricultural and the use of large inputs from agrochemicals. It's still there, but it's much less in this cycle than it is in the cycles where good manure isn't central. This is just an example which I could talk about at length, obviously, but to give you an idea that there is more there which is interesting. Third pattern, energy, transport, infrastructure. If you look at the basic technologies, that might be all sorts of differences, but what is the same is that there is a strong shaping of physical space, rather than having something which is, as it were, a device in its own right, which is somewhere and does certain things. Long lead times, well, you can imagine that. Lots of combinations of actors, in particular public-private combinations. Authorities have a say in infrastructure, in transport, in lots of energy stuff. And a point which I think Jan was making in one of his slides also, that you work live, you have to experiment in vivo, I think you had, was on your slide. You can't try out things in a protected space, as was implicit in my story about industrial products and processes, and the test lab and so on, lead users. Here it's not possible. You have to do real-life experiments, and the world becomes the laboratory. This is a phrase already from quite some time ago, Wolfgang Krohn and Johannes Weyer. And what you now see happening is a strong role of planning, already since, well, early 20th century, but now also simulation models. So the innovation journeys here, we could go into the specifics, but they do evolve. They're not the same as they were, say, in the 1920s. But there is the same overall dynamics because of these key characteristics. Fourth one, ICT. It's interesting that this has become an acronym. So if you say information communication technologies, then people start thinking about where's the information, where's the communication. And this is not much about hardware. You see ICT, and then you have this view of that whole cluster of wonderful things that we all enjoy so much. The key thing there in terms of the nature is that it's a dual nature. You have the material carriers and you have the messages and services. And that is reflected also immediately in the sort of actors which are involved. So you have, say, the network builders and owners, and you have the service providers. And sometimes they're connected, and sometimes there are reasons, all sorts of reasons to not have them connected. The big and small players. And that's very visible also in innovation, because at the side of the services, many smaller players, sometimes just individuals, can develop new services. There's also to do with the strong role of software and the software engineering. And interestingly for our social material stuff is that here the engineering is about instructions that you list and that somehow have to be linked to action in the ICT system. And innovation in ICT is itself innovated. Open source software is such an innovation in the innovating. And there is strong overlap with service innovation in general, which is an area which I haven't covered at all in my, I've looked at it, but I haven't been able to actually think whether this is a separate pattern or whether it's sort of everywhere in all the patterns. What you do see if you try to use this as a sort of grid to look at all sorts of innovation journeys, that there are mixed dynamics. Socio-technical systems, and think of an extreme example as the ideas about hydrogen economy. They have lots and lots of industrial developed products, fuel cells, hydrogen storage, and so on and so forth. So it's clearly a mixed dynamics. But you can zoom in, say, at the level of the systems, and you get then that innovation pattern number 3. Medical and health is and continues to be about nurturing and caring of living entities, trying to improve health or to remedy. So formally, it was and is pattern 2, I think, but it has a strong recourse to products like drugs, other kinds of treatment, hospitals, and so, but you might actually see a sort of swing of the pendulum from a very strong recourse to products to more interest in actual care in the medical world. So that, say, with patients, their life circumstances is becoming almost part of what is considered to be the treatment, rather than that there is a pill which should do magic. And there are other developments. I think this is also a mixed dynamic where automobile manufacturers have been shifting to become system integrators already, and now they're saying, what is our product? It's actually mobility rather than a motor car. And that might also introduce further shifts in dynamics. Then this question that I promised from the very beginning, is there a 5th pattern? There are definitely social legal governance technologies, and Werner was already playing with that in his word of welcome. And I find this a very intriguing example of innovation, which I actually saw because I was in a panel of the Volkswagen Foundation where they looked at these projects. The whole notion of a child's advocate.